All right, we're on Clark Street right now. Clark Street is a street that runs right off of Washington Square, or the Parade, as Professor Rock has called it, what it was known as. And we're in front of the home of the Newport Artillery Company. The Newport Artillery Company traces their charter back to 1741. It was issued by the King of England, George II. And in that time, it was a British colony. They served the British king. Now, during the Revolution, there was dissension among the ranks, like there were in a lot of Newporters. Some went with the British, the Tories, and some stayed with the American colonists, the Patriots. The building behind us dates to 1835. It was built by Alexander McGregor, a Scottish stonemason that came over to build Fort Adams. About 60 years later, they extended the building, made it a little bit longer, and then about 1906, it was a devastating fire that burnt not only a lot of the building, but a lot of the amazing collection of artifacts that they have in the building. They rebuilt that same year, 1906, and now we can see it's 2 stories high, where originally it would have been 1. At the very top of the building, in the pediment, you can see a replica of a paddle wheel cover from an old steamship. These paddle wheel covers, or lunettes, were actually on the steamships, on the paddle wheels, and they all had them. They were very decorative. The original was donated to Mystic Seaport Museum and wasn't restored, or was restored somewhat. And in return, they produced this for the company and gave it to us. The museum is an amazing place to see. It's not opened all the time. So if you do get a chance to come down to Clark Street and see it, it's well worth it.
We're now down at the end of Clark Street. We just walked past the Artillery Museum. And now Vernon House on the corner has quite a history. During the American Revolution, when the French came in 1780, their top general, General Rochambeau, needed a house for his headquarters. And so he chose the Vernon House. Mr. Vernon had gone up to Boston, so this was actually a vacant property in 1780. Rochambeau will spend almost a year, July 1780 to June 1781, here in Newport, waiting, getting ready to work with Washington. Rochambeau made this his headquarters for almost a year, and it's from Newport that Rochambeau will lead his troops, which will eventually go all the way down to Yorktown for the final campaign in October 1781.
And I'll just say a couple more words. We have some air cover flyover today, just in honor of all of you. The Vernon House, as Professor Quinn mentioned, William Vernon. Vernon was one of the wealthier people in New England at the time. And he became a good friend to George Washington. Washington probably visited here, met with Rochambeau. And if you recall the name of Washington's retirement home in Virginia, it was called Mount Vernon. And he named it Mount Vernon partly in honor of his friend William Vernon, whose home was here in Newport, Rhode Island. It's also one of the buildings similar to the Redwood Library that was constructed in that rustification style. So while it may look like it's concrete or cement from across the street, they actually put sand into the paint to give it a grainy texture, and then they beveled out to make it look like it really was stone. If you went up to the building and knocked on it, you'd realize that it was made out of wood. It was an inexpensive technique to kind of give a little more elegance to some of the structures. But this is on the end of Clark Street, one of the nicest and most historic streets here in Newport.
Well, we just moved up a block. Now we're on Division Street, and we've been talking about how Newport has various firsts. We said it has the oldest library, the Redwood. It has the oldest synagogue, Truro. Well, it also makes a claim to have the oldest free black church. And here it is behind us, and there's a plaque that says Union Congregational Church, built in 1834, first free black church in America. That's the claim. There's some argument with another church in Philadelphia. Now this is where the building was put up. This actual building went up in 1871, so that's not the original building, but this is where the Free Black Church was. It continued to operate until the early 1970s, and then it became condos. So there's 4 different units here. So that stained glass window there, that's somebody's apartment, and you can see it definitely needs some more painting, needs some upkeep. So this is sort of a sad monument. It's not really in the condition I think we'd hope for something of this historic significance. So hopefully more will be done in the future to preserve this important church.
And just to tag on to what John said about the African American community, the property across the street from the church to our side here, this red home, was actually in colonial times the home of a congregational minister whose name was Samuel Hopkins. And Newport had 2 congregational churches at that time. Both people, Ezra Stiles, who was connected very much with Charles Synagogue, and Samuel Hopkins, were well-known preachers. Hopkins was very, very much an abolitionist. So he worked with the black community here in Newport and was very instrumental in getting Rhode Island to begin to outlaw slavery. And it's far too rich a history to cover in 2 minutes here for sure. But I think today and in the university seminars, we'll be addressing issues of racism. Hopefully at some point during that curriculum. Newport has a very checkered history, mostly positive, but up, down sometimes, history with slavery, the triangle trade, etc. Much of the economy here was based on slavery, as it was in many colonial areas. So it's an area of interest. You're right here. It's something that you can live and learn while you're studying at Salve. So I hope you do.